What's up guys, I'm James Withy, and today we're going to talk about what blowouts are in tattooing. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about some tattoo terminology. We're going to be talking about the term blowout and what that means in tattooing. So basically in this video what I'm going to do is I'm going to define the term blowout and let you guys know exactly what that is. And then afterwards I'm going to talk about what causes blowouts and what some of the factors are that make blowouts more likely. And then I'm going to talk about what you can do about a blowout if you have blowouts in your tattoo. Okay, so before I talk about what exactly a blowout is, I think it's important to discuss skin for a second. As many of you guys already know, there are several different layers to human skin. I think there's like 7 of them or something like that. But what you might not know is that it's really important like which of these layers the tattoo artist deposits the ink into. So I'm not really sure, numerically which layer it is, but all I know is that it's pretty much like the middle layers of the skin are the ones that are the sweet spot for tattoo artists to put the ink into, because that's where the ink will be held into the skin and suspended in there in a really predictable way that we all desire as tattoo artists and clients, because we're trying to achieve a really specific effect visually, right? On the other side of that, if a tattoo artist puts the ink in like too shallow into the skin and just like deposits ink into the top layers, then what will happen is the ink won't stay, because those layers will just scab up and molt off, and new layers of skin will replace those areas, and basically you'll end up with a tattoo that's either not visible or really light or something like that. Basically what a blowout is though is when the tattoo artist does the opposite of that and goes too deep into the skin. And what happens when the tattoo artist goes too deep is when the ink starts getting deposited into the subcutaneous layers of the skin, which are basically like the fatty tissues underneath the normal layers. And when that happens, the ink kind of just like spreads out and just does whatever it wants to. It doesn't really like stay suspended in the same spot predictably, and it ends up kind of creating like this cloudy, hazy looking bluish mark on the outsides of the area where the tattoo artist actually punctured the skin with a needle. Now this tends to happen on outlines far more often than it happens with shading, and I think the reason for that is because liners, when compared to shaders, like the needle configuration on liners is just much tighter in terms of how closely the needles are grouped together. And because the liner is like more focused than the shading, like it's just stabbing the same spot over and over and over and moving very slowly across the skin, it tends to cause more trauma than what a shader would. And that extra amount of trauma creates more opportunity for something unpredictable to happen under the skin, where the ink gets deposited in a place where the tattoo artist didn't intend for it to, and then it spreads out from there subsequently. Now it also tends to happen more often with black ink than it does with colors. And the reason I think that happens is because black ink has a much lower viscosity on average than colored inks do. There are exceptions to that, of course, like certain brands make some really runny colored inks, but I think that because the black ink is so runny, it makes it so that it will spread out quite a bit more on the skin, just because it flows a little bit more freely than the colored inks do. Not only that, but black also has a very high tinctorial strength. It has a very high staining power when compared to a lot of different colored pigments. And I think that that makes it more visible under the skin when this phenomenon does happen. So it's also possible that some colored inks are blowing out when tattoo artists are doing like line work with colors or really heavy shading with colors, but we just can't see it quite as easily as we can with the black ink. Now it's also important to mention that there are many different degrees to this. As far as blowouts go, there's very minor blowouts where you can just have like a small area on one line of a tattoo that's just a little bit spread out. Or you can have a more severe case of blowout where basically the entire tattoo looks hazy and looks like it has this like really blurry like blue glow around all the line work on it. And sometimes you can even get a blowout to where the blown out area spans beyond like the immediate area where the lines were initially put in, and entire patches that span many square inches can end up having like this bruised look to them that is pretty permanent and just won't go away. Most of the time a blowout can be recognized immediately after it occurs, like either in real time while the tattoo artist is still tattooing you, or when you like get home after a tattoo session, you peel the plastic wrap off, wash the tattoo off with soap and water, and examine it a little bit more closely than you did when you were in the tattoo shop. But sometimes, a blowout can't be noticed until a couple months after the tattoo is healed, and I think in my mind it really depends most on the severity of the blowout. Like the worst blowouts are probably going to be the ones that you are going to be able to recognize as soon as they happen, because it happens like right away as soon as you put the fucking needle into the skin too deep. That shit spreads out and kind of looks like a little like micro spider web, like capillary vein bluish type of thing. But a lot of times, like with the less severe looking blowouts, like particularly the ones that are like a soft bruise looking blowout that spans several square inches across the skin, those ones sometimes don't show up for, you know, a month or two after the tattoo is already totally healed. Okay, so now that we defined exactly what a blowout is in tattooing, let's talk about some of the causes for why a blowout might occur in a tattoo. The most common reasons that I can think of for why a blowout might happen during the tattoo process have to do with either a lack of experience or improper technique on behalf of the artist that's actually applying the tattoo. Now, like this can happen in a bunch of different ways. You know, like one, for instance, is if a tattoo artist is running his machine too hard. You know, there's a certain amount of force that's generated by the tattoo machine when it's driving the needle into the skin and slapping into that skin with a sharp needle. And in tattooing, generally we want to use the minimum amount of force necessary to puncture the skin, so that the needle is just sliding in and out of the skin like really harmlessly, rather than like, you know, impacting the skin very traumatically and like busting up a bunch of different tissues in the skin and creating a bunch of little pathways for the ink to bleed into surrounding capillaries and, you know, suspend in a really unpredictable way. Another reason why improper technique or lack of experience on the artist's part might be at fault with a blowout is because, you know, oftentimes it's just caused by the tattoo artist putting the needle too deep into the skin. You know, we were talking about earlier how there's a sweet spot, like as far as the layers of the skin go, where the tattoo artist ideally would want to deposit the ink, and if he's going too deep, then he's putting that shit, you know, way deep in there, and it's pretty much spreading out in a way that he cannot control. And I feel like that's probably the number one cause for blowouts in tattooing. So while I'm saying this stuff out loud, it kind of occurs to me that to an outsider this might seem pretty simple, like it's a no-brainer. You know, don't put the needle into the skin too deep, don't run your machine too hard. Why the fuck are blowouts even happening amongst artists that are like trained tattoo artists that are, you know, have gone through their apprenticeship and yada yada yada? Well, I'm here to tell you from experience that it really just isn't that simple. Like as far as areas of the body, even on like one specific person, tattooing them on many different areas of their body are going to require different ideal needle depths and different like amounts of voltage and different amounts of force that you're running your machine with to achieve the desired result. So like, you know, what I'm trying to say is that some areas are just much more prone to blowouts than others, and they tend to be the areas that have a lot more capillaries than others, like maybe, I don't know, the hand or the collarbone or like the face or behind the ear, the foot, like areas like that that are a little bit more shallow as far as skin goes and have more capillaries where blood can, you know, flush to those areas more easily. Those are the ones that are more prone to blowouts. And all those areas have like, you know, different characteristics and traits that you have to learn as a tattoo artist when you're new. And really the only way to learn those things is by trial and error. Like I remember the first time that I, you know, tattooed a collarbone on some lady. I was at the first shop that I ever worked at, and I was just doing like a really simple cursive name, and it should have been an easy ass tattoo, but the first line that I pulled on it, I was running my machine at the same voltage that I always ran it on when I was doing any line work whatsoever, and I was putting the needle into the skin at the same depth that I was used to putting it into the skin on all other areas of the body. And the first line that I pulled was like hella crazy blown out, and it was all fucked up. And I remember like one of my friends was just standing there watching me do that tattoo, and as soon as I pulled that fucking line and wiped it and he saw the blowout, he just turned around and fucking walked away without saying anything at all. And I was totally fucking shook by it, but I just kept my composure and finished the tattoo and tried to sculpt out the lines like around that blown out area and just try to thicken it up a little bit to hide it. But that tattoo wasn't really the greatest tattoo that I ever did, and I learned that lesson the hard way, the way that most tattoo artists learn that lesson. Definitely like different skin types on different individuals can matter too. Like it's not just different skin types like within one human body that you have to pay attention to, but also just different skin types on certain types of people. Like people that are like more overweight, like if they're really overweight, then oftentimes they'll have a lot more shallow capillaries going on in their skin, where you can actually see the capillaries in the skin before you even start tattooing on it, particularly like in the calf areas, like those sort of things. And with those tattoos, I know that it's very, very likely that I'm gonna get a blowout, even if I'm using perfect technique and I'm being as careful as possible. So oftentimes it is the tattoo artist's fault that they're getting a blowout because they're using improper technique, or they just lack experience to know like how they're supposed to run their machines or how deep to put their needle in for a specific tattoo or a specific client. But sometimes it's just something that you cannot control, and you know, some people are just way more prone to it than others, and some areas are just way more prone to it than others, and all you can do is just, you know, your best, and that's it, you know, as a tattoo artist. One more thing that I want to discuss before I talk about what you can actually do about a blowout is I want to talk about reasons from the client side that might cause a blowout to occur. Now, you know, just moving a tattoo that's fresh, that you've just gotten, that's still healing. Like for instance, if you get something like in the ditch of the elbow, like in this area here, and you're like moving that elbow all the time, and you're fucking, you know, you're going to work and you're fucking doing the dishes and doing all these different things, just a little bit of motion that's repetitive can cause the skin to, underneath the surface, like open up more little traumatic channels for the ink to kind of flow into areas that weren't intended for the ink to be deposited, and those can cause a little bit of blurriness and fuzziness in your tattoo. So it's really important that when you get a fresh tattoo, you are moving it minimally and just letting it rest as much as possible. Now, in addition to that, like when I was younger, when I was a teenager and people were getting tattoos, it was a pretty common practice to baptize a tattoo if somebody had a fresh one around you. We used to do that to each other just to like troll each other, and what that means is basically we would slap each other's tattoos when they were fresh. Now, obviously this is a fucking idiotic thing to do, but you know, it's worth mentioning. If somebody fucking tries to touch your tattoo or slap your tattoo or like troll you and make it painful for you during the heal, you know, tell them to fuck off, because that can cause a blowout. If somebody slaps your tattoo, it can bust up the capillaries underneath the skin and cause that shit to spread out in unpredictable ways, and that can be an unsightly thing, so don't let them do that. Okay, so the last part of this video is for you guys that are out there that already have blowouts and you're wondering what you can possibly do about them to get rid of them. Now, the short answer to it is there isn't a whole lot you can do short of laser removal or covering the tattoo up. And you know, that is very unfortunate, but it is what it is, man. Tattoos are permanent, and if your shit's blown out, most likely it's gonna stay that way forever. But it does depend on the severity of the blowout. You know, if it's a more severe blowout, then it probably will last for the rest of your life. If it's a very mild blowout and it's just really faint and like slightly blurry, oftentimes the appearance of that blowout can lessen over time as your body naturally expels like those foreign substances by grabbing those pigment particles and just kind of flushing them out through your bloodstream and through your urine. That doesn't happen every single time, but it is possible. Now, as far as cover-ups go, you know, definitely you can hide a blowout by coloring over the areas that are blown out while still not coloring over the lines that were originally intended to be there, and you can hide a blowout that way. But it really depends on the specific circumstance. You know, that's going to work a lot better with tattoos that are like actual objects, where, you know, there's going to be coloring around the lines and it's going to look natural anyway. Like for instance, if you had like a heart tattoo and it was outlined in black and filled in with red and then had like a fucking teal background behind it, then obviously if those lines are blown out, you can just fucking color over the blown out parts with the red and the teal, and then all that remains is the line that was originally intended to be there. But if you have just like a really simple cursive word that says love or something, and those lines are blown out, then it's really difficult to color around that cursive word, all the letters in that cursive word, without it looking weird. So in that case, it's kind of is what it is, and honestly, laser removal might be the best option. So like I said earlier, once you already have a blowout, there's not a whole lot you can do about it, unfortunately. If you don't already have a blown out tattoo and you want to avoid getting one in the future, then obviously you want to do your due diligence and you want to research your tattoo artist properly. That's a really great way to prevent yourself from getting one. You want to make sure that you're picking an experienced tattoo artist that knows what they're doing and has a portfolio that contains some healed pictures in there that have line work in them, so you can examine those pictures and make sure that they are devoid of blowouts, or at least have very minimal blowouts. You know, another thing worth mentioning is that style matters quite a bit when it comes to preventing blowouts in a tattoo. You know, like I said, most blowouts happen on line work, so if you really hate the idea of having a blowout in your tattoo, which honestly isn't too big of a deal as long as it's a minor one, like all of us that have tattoos, like a lot of tattoos, we all have a little bit of blowouts on our body and we just live with it and accept it. But if you totally hate that fucking idea, then maybe, you know, steer away from styles that have a lot of line work in them, like traditional or geometric or those sort of things, and just get more of a realistic tattoo, maybe a soft black and gray, something like that. So other than that, I really don't have too much more to say about the subject. Basically what we've talked about in this video is what exactly a blowout is in tattooing. We've also talked about some of the reasons why blowouts occur in the skin, and we've also talked about some of the things that you can do if you already have a blowout in your tattoo, which there aren't very many, and also what you can do to prevent getting a blowout in any of your future tattoos. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.